struck or your car doesn't start. So I'm just going to chat a little bit for a minute or two while everybody takes their seats. And I'm not going to say a lot of content stuff until everybody gets seated, so you don't feel like you've missed everything, but I want you to think you might. So you're motivated enough to come sit down, just to get the right, sort of the right line there. Let's see, if I'm not going to give you my talk, what should I talk about? Oh, I know. I'm here with, I want to introduce my staff. I'm here, yes, Amy, I'm doing it, yes, Amy Moore. Our book table is back there. Amy Moore is my class coordinator and training director, and Denise Whelan, in the black, happily waving, is the office manager. Now, do we look like we're from the Midwest, or what? Right? So we're in Marin County. I wasn't born in the Midwest, but I've sort of taken on that sort of general corn-like kind of flavor. So we're in Marin County, and we're going to Ristorante Orsi. We're going to this really cool Italian restaurant in Marin County, California, right? And we're walking in, and we're like in shorts. You know, it was travel day, you know. So we're sort of dragged out, and we're in shorts, and we're sort of schlepping into this hotel, and this Italian maitre d' who's all dressed up comes up. And I turned to Denise and Amy, and I said, oh, do we look like we're from the Midwest? Do you guys have any corn? Is this Kansas? It's real different here. It's really, really, really different here. People are thinner. You know, when I did Pt1, Nat Katzman, who's the producer of Pt1, who's this marvelous, wonderful, little tiny man who also lives in San Francisco, his huge job was to get all these videotapes. For those of you who don't know, there's this TV show called Pt1. It's on Animal Planet. And people send in videos of some problems they're having with their pet. And then me and Doug McConnell, my ex-husband, would talk about it, and I would try and diagnose it and come up with some treatment plan in a minute and a half while being charming and engaging and funny, but yet constructive, right? And after about the first videos came in, I was talking, I said, well, Nat, you know, what is it like to get all these videos of all these problem behavior pets? And he said, pets? He said, I'm not looking at the pets. What I discovered is that this country is full of really, really large people. You know? There are a lot. It's true, Nat, they're all not, you know, all not like you. It's true, it's true, it's true. Oh, you're all here now. Okay, I guess I can start. Hi. 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 I'm Tricia McConnell. And if I wasn't, wouldn't that be gutsy? I just thought, wouldn't that be a hoot if I came up and said, like, who are you guys? Like, I'm Georgia. This is the creative cooking seminar. You did bring your raspberries, didn't you? Yeah? Yeah, good, good, because we'll be making raspberry soufflés very soon. If I could have the lights off and start the slides, I want to get started with a brief introduction, and then we'll talk about logistics and the really important things in life, like where to pee. So if I could have the lights off in the first slide, I just want to start out by talking about magic, what to me is magic. I mean, I can just get all wussy right off the bat. Oh, I can do this, can't I? Here. Can I have the first slide, she says, standing right next to things. Can you guys see that? Turn all those lights off. Is it okay? I don't think it's good enough. Oh, that's better. Okay. Okay. We have covers for the windows if need be. I just decided need be, so at break we'll put covers up. But I want you to be able to see in case you want to write too. So this is my magic slide. This is the slide that gets me in touch with this unbelievable topic that we're going to spend the weekend talking about. This incredible relationship between two different species. And I'm a biologist, I'm a scientist, I'm an ethologist. I'll talk in a minute about who that is and what that is. But besides the incredible attraction that all of us obviously have, God, I hope so, or else why are you wasting your weekend? You know, the incredible attraction that we all have to this other species, and I would argue that this other species has to us, biologically, as a biologist, this is a miraculous relationship. There is nothing in natural history that is even close. Oh, oh God. Oh God. That's the punishment part, okay? What do I get? What do I get? That's so hard. Ooh, you know this, right? It's awful. Okay. As a biologist, I'm just going to try. I have to face my fears, don't I? Yes. Breathe. Oh God, I'm so scared. Oh God, oh God, oh God. Okay, do you care that I have a double chin? No. Nobody else cares? Okay. Wasn't that stupid? Now you're going to be looking at my double chin the whole weekend, aren't you? No, you are. And so am I. Why did I say that? Don't you wish you could edit your speech? Like do a little shade delete thing? I didn't say that. It's gone now. It's gone now. As a scientist, this relationship between these two species is miraculous. In terms of evolution and natural history and ethology, it's absolutely incredible. It's an unbelievable relationship. I think it's one of the most miraculous pieces of evolution that there is out there. So it's not just the sort of psychological, emotional excitement, although I don't want to trivialize that. I think that's very important. I think people have trivialized the way we feel about our dogs. I'm sure you've noticed that. Oh, it's just, you know, her. It's just pets, right? You notice pets is not a real high status word. But it's also this incredible fascination, this incredibly important piece of science about how did these two species end up living together like they are. There are lots of other species who live together in time and space in nature. We could spend all weekend talking about it, actually. So it's not unprecedented in that it occurs. It's unprecedented in the depth to which it occurs. So we're going to talk about a lot of aspects of that relationship this weekend. Slide. Oh, there it is. And just briefly to get us into it, as you all know, it's not news to you that this is a very long-standing relationship. This is from an Egyptian frieze from about 2,000 years BC. We have been hanging out with dogs for a really, really long time. That's really clear, isn't it? That's a little picture of mud. Actually, that's a medieval slide, and this is not going to work, you guys. You're going to have to cover those. Yeah, but that's an hour and a half from now. Oh, is that better? Round with this particular species. And some people are arguing that we did not domesticate dogs in the sense that we sort of made a decision. We were hanging around a campfire. We said, you know, let's design, let's go out and domesticate dogs. There's a lovely book, have you seen it? It's called Covenant of the Wild. That would be a cool book to sell, by the way, bookseller people. That would be a cool book to sell. Stephen Budiansky wrote it. It's called Covenant of the Wild. It's basically a book about how domestication is a natural process of evolution. And it's speculative, but it's based on some good science, and it's very, very interesting. I mean, you can see from this picture from Australia in the Aboriginal country that there's an obvious advantage to dogs to hanging around humans. Most of us know, actually, that the most important function of the domestic dog is to clean your kitchen floor, right? Mop? Sponge, mop, what? Called a tongue. So I think it's a very credible question of who domesticated who. You know, did we oppressively domesticate animals like some animal rights people are now arguing that it's not, that it's dominionistic and oppressive to own a dog. It's sort of a master-slave relationship. Some biologists are arguing that actually the species that gets the better end of the stick is actually a domestic dog. They're certainly incredibly successful as an animal. If you look at numbers, if you just look at population numbers, how many canids in the world are they? This species is doing really well. Really, really well. So we're not doing too badly by dogs. So not only have we been hanging around with them for a really long time, but we love them. You know, oh, we love them so much. And We could actually talk for a long time. I won't, I promise, but I love this topic about why we love them so much. Obviously, part of it is this innate sort of mammalian attraction to something that's somewhat juvenile, to something that needs care. If you're a species like we are that has this very long developmental time in which the young requires huge, they're born helpless and they require huge amounts of care, this basically is a process which is known as a pain in the butt. And, right? and we would be extinct as a species if 3-year-olds were not just unbearably cute, because we would kill them, right? So you go in to kill them and you go, "Aw." Well, there's a lot of awe factor in dogs and puppies. It's why humane societies never have enough puppies, but are overwhelmed with adolescents, right? What is the standard age of surrender at a humane society? It's adolescence. It's, right? Everybody in a shelter knows this. You get a whole bunch of teenage dogs. Nobody wants teenagers, you know, right? So there are a lot of reasons we love them. One is because I think we have this innate nurturing response, and there are all kinds of other reasons, and I think many of them are very, very good and very, very healthy and very complicated and very high level. I don't like the condescending attitude of people have dogs to substitute for kids or for other people or for other relationships. That might be true in some cases, but I don't think that's generally true. I think we get things out of our relationship with dogs that you don't get from other relationships. Primarily, they can't talk back, you know, right? Which is really wonderful. There's actually, I tell stories a lot, so just hang out, because this is what it's going to be like. There was literally a physicist from MIT who called me. He was an Indian, the country of India, and he called me and he said, Dr. McConnell, I have a very, very good, important idea for us. He said, I'm a physicist and I am able to technically transform the vocalizations of the domestic dog digitally and to transpose it into actual written words. You, I understand, have studied canine behavior and are able to translate the barks of the dog. Therefore, I propose that you and I get together as a team. We make many money. We make many money, and we will develop a handheld device such as a remote control in which the owner holds the device towards the dog as the dog barks. My device inputs the sound, transposes it into the language which you have provided, and the owner can read a digital readout of the message of the dog. And now I have a really big problem. I mean, right now I have a really big problem because the end of the story is a dirty word. And usually I'm not being taped. So I'll figure out how I can get around this. The end of the story is that I told a friend of mine who's an animal caretaker who takes care of a lot of dogs and a lot of animals, and she said, oh yeah, I can just see it. Some poor owner is going to point this thing towards their dog, and they're going to say, F you. Right? So I think that's one of the things we love about our dogs. They really can't talk back. This idea that they give us non-judgmental positive regard, right? Do you believe that? No, they don't. They do sometimes. I mean, they do like at 8:03, right? You know, when you come home and they're like, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And then you tell them to downstay while the other dog gets the ball. This is not non-judgmental positive regard at this point. You have a little bird who's watching too. Now you remember everything. Don't forget. Okay, so basically what this weekend is an inquiry. This weekend is an inquiry into who dogs are and why they do what they do. And I'm going to talk a lot. We're going to show a lot of slides. I'm going to show a lot of videos. We're going to work a lot of dogs. I want you guys to be engaged as much as we can. But really, that's what I want us to be in, is a weekend of inquiry. And my goal is that you leave just buzzing with questions. And that's hard to do because, you know, there's just getting to be a really high level of sophistication about canine behavior, which is really gratifying. But that's my goal, is that if I'm engaged and you're engaged, you guys will leave here just buzzed. Just buzzed thinking about things you'd never thought about. Before we get to the logistics, I want to let you know what my bias is. Every presenter has a bias. You know, one of the things about science that science teaches you is that the process of science, and I'm a scientist primarily, the process of science is extremely objective. But scientists aren't. Scientists aren't supposed to be objective. Science is not a cold, objective, quantified field in which people sort of spend all their time being cold and objective. Science is a passionate, opinionated, rowdy field. People get in fights at meetings. There's a famous meeting in which one scientist threw water on the stage on another scientist because they disagreed with it. I'm not advocating that. As a person standing on a stage, I am particularly not advocating that. But science is a very passionate enterprise in which no scientist pretends to be objective. So my bias, I want you to know what my bias is. My bias is through the particular science that I studied. I'm an ethologist. That's a word everybody in Europe knows, and most people in this country think you mean ecologist. Are you like, does she have a little lisp? You know, who knows? I don't know how many of you know, and many of you might know. Who knows what an ethologist is? Yay, purple. Yay, white back there. So 5 of you maybe. Now you're all going to know at the end of the weekend. An ethologist is basically a scientist who studies an animal's behavior in particular in relation to that animal's natural environment. Ethology is interested in behavior as it relates to a particular species and how it evolved in an environment. So it doesn't believe that you can take an individual and put them in a laboratory and completely understand them. It's a very rigorous science. It's extremely rigorous. You have to know physiology, neurophysiology, neurochemistry, anatomy, physics, calculus. It's very rigorous, but it's very humble. I mean, the way you start studying any species as an ethologist is you go out to where they live, you go out to their natural environment, and you just sit and observe them and take observations. Now, this is not easy. It sounds simple, very low tech. It's extremely difficult. You have to get trained to do it, sort of like a sport. So imagine that you were sitting describing my behavior right now. Just imagine, just start trying to write down a very detailed description of what I'm doing, including, you know, like hand movements, foot movements, eye movements, orientation, speed, rate, etc. So I'm just being a normal person here, and imagine trying to write down in real time what I'm doing. It's really hard, but it teaches you so much. And the idea is that we should let the animals tell us what the important questions are. You know how the answers are all driven by the questions? Well, this is the science in which that I'm always passionate about, is a science that it's very respectful. It says that animals should tell us what the important questions are. So this is, I never know when the one's up. This is the natural environment of the domestic dog, right? It's with a person. And literally one of the reasons I started studying them is because I was older when I went to school. I was a freshman when I was 30, and I didn't want to go live in Africa for 2 years because I'd have to leave, I have to leave all my friends and my family and my community and at the time my husband. So this is the natural environment of the domestic dog. And so this is the environment in which we should study them. So my bias is that to really understand dogs and who dogs are, we need to understand what they evolved from, the environment they have evolved into and through, the environment they're living in now, plus really good solid principles of learning theory. So it's combining ethology and psychology. I think if you really, really want to understand an animal, you want to understand as much as you can about their natural history and general principles of psychology. So that's what we're going to do this weekend. I'm going to stop now and let the other alpha bitch, who's also named Trish, Kathleen, can I tell them about the Alpha Bitch Conference? Kathleen has decided she's going to host a conference, and she asked Trish King and me and Sue Sternberg and Donna Duvall to do Dufert, I'm sorry, isn't that an actress or something? She'll love me. Donna Dufert. And I said, oh, cool, the Alpha Bitch Conference. So let me just get down in status, because height is status, you know. Do you want the mic?
Yeah.
You take the handheld
Actually, I can
one.
just yell.
Take the handheld one.
Okay.
That word, whenever I want. It's one of the benefits of being in this field. It's really true. Was there any other announcement I wanted to make? Yeah, there's actually one other thing I wanted to say before we got started on my first set of content slides, which is there's this fine line I want to walk. That's a very fleeting line. I mean, it's very tenuous. It's a hard line to find, but I love it when you find it. And the line is between having this weekend be interactive, where you're not just sitting all the time and listening to me talk. I want to engage you, and you know the other side of that, right? Have you ever been to a seminar where you paid to see somebody talk, but they never did, right? Because Martha over there wouldn't shut up? Yes. It's a challenge up here, you know? And I want you guys to be able to talk. That's what makes it worth it for me to come here. That's just such bull. That's, you know, I've said that at every seminar, and really it's so fun to be the one to get to talk. It is. We all want to be the one to get to talk, don't you? It's just an incredible luxury. I mean, the night before you want to throw up, and sometimes do, but it is a great luxury. And so I really understand wanting to talk. I really, really get it. And at the same time, somebody just has to keep things on track. That's me. So I may shut you up. And I'll just say, I'm sorry right now. Because I just might have to say, thanks. Next, right? Because somebody just has to keep us on track. So that's the only announcement I think I have. Anything else? Nope, that's it. Okay, what I want to start off today with, we're going to spend a lot of today on this. We're going to talk about factors that influence behavior. You know, basically, we're going to spend most of today on why does my dog do that? You know that wonderful question? Many of you are professional trainers, am I right? Raise your hands if you're professional trainers. Good girl. Good people. So a lot of you are professional trainers. Yeah, and a lot of you are in that wonderful middle ground of very, very, very knowledgeable amateur, right? So I'm sure many of you have had someone, as they were leaving, at the end of the time, at 10 minutes after the end of the time, say, oh, I just have one quick question. I'm sure you've never heard that, right? And it actually took me 6 years to be able to come up with a quick answer to that, which is, you know, in my experience, quick questions often don't have quick answers. No? Isn't that good? It works. It works. I mean, I'd love to hear some more. You know, I'm getting tired of that one, actually. But so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the answer to that quick question. Why did my dog bite? Why did my dog do that? Why did that happen? Why is he like the way he is? Why is he afraid when the agility equipment falls down? That's what this is going to talk about. We're going to talk about behavior and factors that influence it. And the first thing I want to talk about towards that end is behavior, what is behavior? There's actually a lot of confusion about what behavior is. I love it. People will call me or talk to me and say, you know, I have a client whose dog chases his tail obsessively. Now, do you think it's behavioral? Well, yeah, because it's chasing its tail. Yeah, I do. Now, what is the force that's driving that particular behavior? Well, I don't know. Is it physiological? Could be. Is it psychological? Could be. Are those separate? No, not at all. Behavior is the interaction of everything inside and everything outside. So if you're really serious about understanding behavior, you need to learn, just keep learning, and don't ever think you'll be done. I'm not even close to done. But keep learning everything you can about physiology, everything you can about neurotransmitters and neurohormones, everything you can about reproductive hormones, everything you can about psychology, everything you can about functional anatomy, everything you can about genetics, everything you can about early development. It's all of that stuff. Behavior gets really complicated, which is part of what makes it really fun. It's the interaction of the inside and the outside. So the more you understand about all those parts, the more you'll understand it. So we're going to start deconstructing some of those parts and start by talking about a list of factors that influence behavior. We're going to talk first about genetics and about genetic influences on behavior. Now, the obvious first genetic influence on the behavior of a domestic dog is that, they're wolves, right? We all know that dogs derive from wolves. As a matter of fact, you may or may not know that they've just recently been reclassified taxonomically as the same species. And that's actually relatively recent. It's very gratifying. I know when I was in grad school a million years ago, it actually wasn't, well, I was 30, but that was still a million years ago. When I was in grad school, dogs and wolves were completely different species, right? Canis familiaris, Canis lupus. And I never understood it because I knew they could interbreed. You know, I knew about wolf-dog hybrids, but the biological definition of a species is very, very clear. The way you tell individuals apart, the way you group them into species, is if two individuals of sort of unknown species mate, and they may have offspring like a mule, but that offspring has to be fertile. So it's just a question, their genes have to be close enough to be able to have reproductively viable offspring. It actually turns out you can be a little bit apart and have offspring, but those offspring don't turn out to be fertile. So that's the definition of a species. Knowing that, I could never understand why wolves and dogs were different species. Well, they're not. They just reclassified them about 4 or 5 years ago. They're now considered to be the same species, completely the same species. So the little cute little fluff dog that Trish just rescued is the exact same species as these individuals you see up there. So dogs are wolves, and wolves are dogs. Except if you called me and said, I want to bring a wolf to the seminar, I'd say, oh, no, you don't. That's nice, you want to, but you don't get to. Dogs aren't wolves. We know that, right? But dogs are wolves. So what? So how do you explain this contradiction? I mean, they really are wolves. They really are, and they're really not. So what is it? I'm really asking. What is it? It's behavior. And what is it about their behavior? What makes them different? Domestication. And what does domestication do? That's it. Oh, she gets one. Oh. So good. Pass it back to her. Oh. It's the honor system. And not to be sexist, although I love to talk about the sexes, by the way. I'm a biologist. I get to do that. If this was all guys, they would have caught that. You know, it's true. And as a matter of fact, just in case I don't get back to this, even though it's off track, I would never do that. Get off track. If you're ever working on counter conditioning and you're trying to you have a shy dog and you want people to throw or toss treats and not pet the dog, you know how your clients or you will say, please don't pet this dog. He's afraid of people, and and if you're not worried about a lawsuit, you'll say, I'm afraid he might snap or bite at you. And people go, really? Why not? Or, but I love dogs, right? It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It's a basic principle of human behavior. We're a great species. But you know what? If you throw a ball to them, especially if they're a guy, they have to catch it. And now you've engaged their hands, so you can say, please don't pet this dog. Whap! Would you throw it for them? Okay, sure, fine. It works great. Works really well. Human ethology, dog ethology, they're all very mixed up. So what's different is that dogs have been juvenilized. Dogs are wolves, but they're juvenile wolves, they're not adult wolves. And I want to talk about a little bit of research that sheds so much light on how that could happen. It's just really great science. There's a Russian scientist named Belayev. He's passed away. This is Belayev here, working with fur foxes. Belayev is interested in genetics, or was interested in genetics. He's interested in domestication and was fascinated by that process and the changes that you see in the species that are domesticated. At the same time he was doing this research, the Russian fur fox, no matter how you feel about fur, there aren't a lot of people throwing blood on furs in Russia. There's just not a big animal rights activist group there. Furs are still very, very popular, although I don't know how they're affording them anymore. But there are a lot of fur farms where foxes are raised, and you probably know they're raised in relatively small cages, right? And anybody who's worked with a dog in a crate knows there's this hand in the crate, muzzle with a muzzle presentation guarding the entire opening. You know, there's this problem with the dog and a canid, and that they can move their body around, and there's this mouth, and you have to get in there somehow. So the fur farmers had a problem with caretakers getting bitten. They had big gloves, everybody hated the gloves. So they asked Belayev, could he start an experiment where he started selecting for foxes who wouldn't bite? So he just did classic genetics 101. He took the most docile female and the most docile male, the least likely to bite, and he bred them together. And then he tested their litters, and he took the most docile of those, and he bred them together. Obviously, he had some larger sample because he didn't want some terrible population bottleneck. But in basics, that's what he did. He just bred docile to docile. And what he found, he started classifying these foxes into 3 different groups at first. The first group were relatively wild type in that the test was that you'd offer food in one hand and try and pet with the other. Wonderful test of any dog, any canid. And he found there was one group who would try to flee, who would bite, who would run away, who basically offered no friendly affiliative response whatsoever. They were either fearful or they were aggressive. The second group were animals who allowed petting but had no friendly, what we would call a friendly response, as opposed to the third group who offered lots of affiliative behavior. They wag their tails, they whined, they may try to lick, they would approach the handler. And so he just kept selecting the most docile from class 3, and what he found after not many generations was what he called the domesticated elite, which was the super friendly ones, a whole other 4th class, that you could see even before 4 weeks. You could see before a month of age these individual foxes who solicited attention, who did a lot of licking, who did paw raising, and basically started acting like a lot of domesticated dogs. By the 10th, I love this data, by the 10th generation, 18% of them were in the domesticated elite, just 10 generations. By the 20th generation, 35% of them were in the domesticated elite. That's incredibly heritable trait. That's a profoundly heritable trait. And I'm talking about this, by the way, because all of this is going to relate a lot to what dog bites and why they bite, and a lot about our breeding and genetics and predictions and prognoses about the dogs we see. So that's why I'm spending a lot of time on it, because it's a really great foundation. One of the most interesting things about his research is that even though he selected for one trait, docility, he got a suite of changes. He got this huge, not huge, but he got a great variety of behavioral and physiological anatomical changes that he didn't necessarily predict. He got spots. He got white. He got piebald spots on his foxes. He got animals with white-tipped tails. He got animals with a star. He calls it a star pattern right here on their chest. He got animals with a star up on their forehead. And he looked at other species, and think about how common that is in domesticated animals. You see it in horses. You see it in cattle. You see it in colored sheep very, very often. If they're not all white, they're black. They often have a white spot here. A lot of people don't like it, and they work very hard to try and get rid of it, but it's very hard to get rid of. So by selecting just for docility, he started changing the way they looked. He had no intention of doing that. As a matter of fact, the fur industry dropped out of this whole project because it ruined the fur. It just ruined the fur. So they like dumped him. His co-workers are trying to continue the research, but apparently they're living on just a shoestring. Here are some of the other changes, the concomitant changes that he found. He found this curled tail, which is one of the main characteristics between a, quote, pariah dog, a feral dog, versus a wild canid. I mean, one of the first ways you look to see if you have if an animal is been domesticated or not is by looking at that curly tail. Now, obviously, all of our breeds no longer have those curly tails. Very probably all the first domesticated dogs had that curled tail like that. We'll talk more about tail sets later because I think that's a fascinating topic. They also often got curly or wavy hair, which you see in a lot of other domesticated breeds. I was fascinated and never would have predicted to learn that you get a lot of jaw problems. They got a lot of foxes with bad bites. Isn't that interesting? Here we are fighting bad bites as breeders, right? And they got a lot of animals. There's this real labile jaw structure, apparently, that relates to messing around with this sort of umbrella controlling gene. This is one of the women who's continuing his research. That's one of the foxes who has not a spot on it, but you can see it's a little gray. Do you see there's gray on its head? It's again, it ruined the fur. You start changing pigmentation a lot. Some of the other changes he found behaviorally and physiologically where he found a later fear response. You know, the classic fear period that Scott and Fuller talked about at about 8 weeks in puppies. Well, in the wild-type foxes, it's at 6 weeks. In the domesticated elite, it's at 9 weeks. Think about that when you think about puppy tests. We'll get back to that. He also found very significant changes in stress responses. Very, very big, important physiological changes in production of corticosteroids. I have so much trouble saying that word. Corticosteroids. And neurotransmitters like serotonin. He found the domesticated elite exhibited less stress under environmental change, whereas the wild types, which is just what you'd expect, exhibited more stress responses, which you might argue in the wild is quite adaptive. You know, it really isn't going to work if you're a wild animal to go, oh, look, the forest is different today. Yippee skippy. You know, you're new. What are you? Right? This is not going to result in a lot of children, you know, because usually new is bad out in the wild. He saw a drop in adrenal production, which actually relates to corticosteroids. He found a few actually began to cycle 2 times a year, which, as you know, is one of the big, huge physiological differences between wolves and dogs. And isn't it interesting that that correlates with being a juvenile? You know, they cycle more rather than less. So here's this whole suite. The big message to get from this long story is that by selecting for one thing, one behavioral characteristic, he changed a huge suite of characteristics, some of which were behavioral and some which were anatomical. So start thinking about what we're breeding for. Could it go the other way around? What if you're breeding for a high tail set and a cocky attitude because it wins in obedience and conformation ring? You know? What else is that going to do in terms of behavior? It can go both ways. These things are really linked together. So the more we learn, the more research we do, the more we're going to understand our dogs, and the better we're going to be able to breed, and the more we're going to be able to breed dogs who don't bite people, which is really what we ought to be giving ribbons for. You know, why are we giving ribbons for where their tail is? Flat top line. And I don't want to sound like a big, and I don't, you know, I'm not a big bad mouther. It's not because I'm morally superior. I don't enjoy it. It's just not fun for me. And I love fun. I'm committed to fun. So I do what's fun. And what's fun for me is to learn what I can from different fields. I went to confirmation. My mother shows in confirmation. So I have a long sort of bloodline of showing confirmation. And I was at a confirmation show when I was in grad school studying behavior. And I hadn't been to a lot of them at the time, and I was sitting around with a bunch of handlers, and they were all talking about stuff confirmation people talk about. They're talking about top line. I heard top line all throughout the day, and I finally said, it was like 4 in the afternoon, and everybody was done. We were all sort of sitting around, probably having a beer or something, and I said, you know, I've been hearing you guys talk about top line all day. Why is it so important? What is it about top line that's so critical? And my mom, it's my own mom, bless her poor little heart, said, well, honey, if they don't have a straight, flat top line, they're not structurally sound, and they can't run as far or run as fast. I said, you mean like a greyhound? Or a cheetah? long pause. Sorry, Mom. There's this long pause in which about 8 women sat around sort of going. And my hero woman, handler, said, "Oh, honey, we just do it because it looks pretty and we like it." And I said, "Bless you for being really honest," you know. Now, obviously, there are a lot of structural things in conformation that have great function, right? Good hips, good angulation, etc. But we need to be thinking about what we're breeding. We need to be thinking about what links with what else. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. What I want to do now is, are you guys fine? Are you comfy? Are you okay? You're not too hot? You're not too cold? You're okay? Everybody's okay? Okay. What I want to do now then is yeah, we've got good time for this, is to switch, well, not switch, but to get more specific. Let's talk about individual traits that I think are genetically mediated. And some of these we know they are, and some of them I just think they are. It's just a belief. And I'm always going to be really careful about separating belief from science. Not that anybody in the world of dogs would ever have opinions that they knew and that we're right, right? Why are we so invested in being right? It's not like I'm immune to that. I love to be right. But I will be very clear to you about what I feel like science knows and what is just a belief of mine. And I'll be asking you your opinions on some of this stuff too, because I really want to know more. So I want to talk about individual traits right now that, no, I'm going to skip this, that are genetically mediated. And the first one I want to talk about is not one of those real plastic ones like size. I mean, here's a peer. Here are 2 members of the same species. Imagine if that was true in our species. The mind really boggles. I was thinking about dating when I asked that question to myself this morning. Can you imagine? George, where would you like to go tonight? Or, George! It's really sort of mind-boggling. Oh, the mind just shuts down at the thought. You know, and isn't that interesting? You talk about this whole thought of actually breeding humans on purpose. I find that just chills me. And I think a lot of people have that same reaction. Have you had that same reaction when people talked about cloning dogs? You know, there's talk now about cloning dogs. I have no fact or no truth or anything to convey to you, but just an inquiry about why does that flip me out? You know, I was telling a friend of mine that just bothered me, and he said, "Well, why, Tricia? Because you're a breeder, and you're absolutely committed to breeding certain traits, you know, and you think your dog Luke is just the coolest dog in the world, and if you could, aren't you trying to replicate Luke? Isn't that what you're doing?" "Yeah," she says, losing cognitive steam. "Yeah, it is." "Well, then why are you so opposed to cloning?" "'Cause I don't know. It's just, ooh, it bothers me. It's bothering me with sheep, not as much. Apparently it has to do with how much, you know, we think of them as part of our social partners, right?" Anyway, there are some traits that are not so plastic as size. And by the way, it's the juvenilization of dogs that makes them so plastic. Thank God cats aren't like that. I mean, we talked about people being a funny story, but imagine working as a behavior consultant with cats, you know? You know? How many people work with behavior problems with cats? They make anything else look really easy, don't they? Please take away the animal with 5 weapon points. You know, there's only one place you got to worry about on a dog. And granted, it's 5 to 9 times faster than you are, but it's only one place. Oh, man, isn't it scary when they go bad on you? Whoa. Whoa. I love cats, by the way. I adore them. But I want to talk about a trait that is not plastic at all. It's extremely prepotent. You know what I mean, right? It's highly heritable, and it's passed on from generation to generation at a very high rate. Shyness. Shyness in dogs, we know, I'm going to give you some science behind this. We know that there's a little animal. There's a little noise back here. It's a mouse. Hi, sweetie. I love mice. I like rats too. Rats are good, except in my barn. We know that shyness. Can you guys hear it, or is it just, you think I'm like fantasizing up here? Oh, it's the agility class. Okay, as long as I know, it's just like, you know, don't know. Okay, okay. Shyness is highly heritable. This is a fact. We know that. And we know it from 20 years of research from Scott and Fuller. Have you gotten their book, The Genetics of Behavior? And have you read it through page to page to page, reading every page? Liars. I reviewed that book and I didn't read every single page, but it's a marvelous book. It has a lot of very important information in it. It's not how we do science, ethological science anymore. It's very primitive. And my biggest criticism of that book was that there was no foreword that said, this was written in 1945. You know, this is not an example of how people do science on behavior now. But it's a classic, if you can look at it, understanding it's a historical document as well as it is one that provides a lot of information about dogs and why dogs do what they do. And one of the things they found is that shyness is highly heritable. It had one of the highest heritability factors when they quantified it of any behavioral trait they looked at. It's highly prepotent. And we talked about why before. If you're a wild animal, you live in the woods, you know, you're going to run into the woods when a new thing appears. This is not the way you pass your genes on real well. It's very prepotent, doesn't want to drop out. What is shyness? I want to talk for a second about what shyness is. I don't know if you've noticed, but most of us don't want to have a shy dog. So many people, I have clients come in, most of what I do, my business is Dog's Best Friend, and we have a whole set of classes, from puppy classes to tracking and agility and tricks and games and lots of basic obedience. Most of what I do now is I see serious behavioral problems. And people will come in to see me and start talking about their dog who's like behind the chair, what I call waffle breathing. I want another word for this. You know what I mean? Chuffing. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's excellent. Chuffing. Perfect. Thank you. Chuffing. Chuffing. Yes. Yes. Bonus. As long as I can use it. Chuffing. Perfect. I don't know why, but that, you know what I mean, right? It's very shallow, very rapid breathing, which we know is related to stress. And that you get this air coming with a little lifts go out, right? So this dog is chuffing, his pupils are dilated, and it's leaning like this, and it's behind the chair. And I'll ask them about their dog, and they'll say, well, they're not shy. They're just a little cautious. Or they're a little reserved. Or they're aloof. But they're not shy.
Or they've been abused.
Oh, always. Everything has been abused. God, it's an awful world out there. Well, I'll talk about that later for puppy tests. It's amazing how invested we are in the fact that somebody beat our dog. And sometimes they have been abused, but just as often as not, they're genetically shy. And I'm laughing, right? We're all going, ha, 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 and I did it too. I didn't have the litter. Lassie had the litter, but my dog had a litter. And I was paying, you'll see a lot of slides, and I was paying a lot of attention to their behavior. And I noticed very early on, at about 3.5 weeks, 5 of them were very, very bold. And 3 of them would hang back a little bit. So when new people would come to see them, if there was a big group of people around the area where the puppies were, 5 would run out, and 3 would hang back for maybe 3 to 5 seconds or so, and then come out with coaxing, and then would come out. Oh, they weren't shy. No, they were cautious. I was like, what are you doing? Your puppies are a little shy. That's what they are. It's just a continuum. Shyness is a fear of unfamiliar things. That's all it is. It's a very clear, concise biological term, and it means fear of unfamiliar things, period, end of sentence. And if you get an individual who's a little anxious or cautious or fearful or reserved of unfamiliar things, they're shy. They can be a little shy, they can be a lot shy. And it's highly heritable. It's highly heritable. And we, as I mentioned, Scott and Fuller, these are some dogs from their research. They actually work with 5 breeds. Cocker Spaniels, Shelties, Beagles, Basenjis, and Terriers. Right, thank you, Fox Terriers. And I have argued, I love Basenjis, so please don't think this is a slur, but I don't classify them as domestic dogs. And we shouldn't, because they only cycle once a year. They're really not domesticated dogs. They're fascinating animals. I just adore them, but they're not dogs. You know? And at first I thought, well, he shouldn't have used them because they're not dogs, but I actually think it added a tremendous amount of interest to this particular study by crossing such a wild-type canid in there. So again, what they found is it's highly heritable. There's been some lovely research in England. This is not a dog, but since you can't see it anyway, I might have to tell you that. This is a test of your eyesight. Please read these letters down here. If you can't read the message down here, you can't drive home. And we're taking your driver's license away. That's a cat. That's Spices, and Spices is here to remind me to talk about this great research that was done in Cambridge, England, that was on shyness and the heritability of it. It's also heritable. It's heritable in many animals. They found out years ago, or 10 years or so ago, it was heritable in humans. And the sociologists were so excited. It's heritable. Shyness is heritable. There's a heritable component to shyness in humans. And all the dog breeders went, yeah, uh-huh. Like, duh. Like, yeah, we knew that. Well, it's also heritable in cats. And they did a lovely, lovely piece of research. They had a male who was extremely prepotent for shyness. They bred him to many different queens, female cats, who had a variety of the shy, bold continuum. And the great experiment that they did that I thought was so interesting is that they then varied their early environment. I'm going to talk later this morning about early environment and how important that is in terms of shyness and boldness and socialization. And so just to oversimplify what they did, they raised they had basically 4 groups. They had shy kittens who were raised with no socialization to people, bold kittens who were raised with lots of socialization to people, and the in-betweens, right? So shy, socialized, shy, not socialized, bold, not socialized. And they got exactly what you would expect on the extremes, exactly. So the bold kittens who got lots of, it actually wasn't lots, it was 10 minutes a day for only a few weeks during their critical period, which is 3 to 7 weeks. It's over much earlier in kittens, by the way. It's 12 weeks in dogs. And that ending is pretty slippery. But between 3 and 7 weeks, they spent 10 minutes a day, like 4 days a week. It was very, very brief. And the others had no contact with people at all. And just like you would expect, the socialized, bold kittens were you put them in a little room, you put a person in the middle on a chair, you put the kitten in the room, and then you went to see what the kitten did. And those kittens ran up to the person, jumped in their lap, were all over them. And you know exactly what the shy, non-socialized kittens did. They huddled in the corner. They wouldn't get anywhere near the human. What I find is interesting are the middle ones. The shy, socialized, and the bold, not socialized, couldn't tell them apart. Could not distinguish their behavior. All the quantified data, latency to approach, duration of contact, content of contact, you know, did they do chin rubbing, how much approach, did they actually initiate, well, how much did they initiate when they were in contact? Couldn't tell them apart. You got the exact same data. So how many people do you have come to you and say, I have a 2-year-old dog, he was a surrender, I got him from the shelter, and I didn't get him from the shelter because the next line they say is, then I really want to breed her, and I'm sure she's like fine, right? Because I'm sure she was. I think she's a really sound dog, but I know she was abused. I'm just sure she was abused. Well, no, you don't. You don't know squat. You cannot tell. You can't tell. Get a 2-year-old dog who's shy. You do not know. if you don't know the background of that dog, you cannot tell. And also, you also want to look at that interaction. You know, if you've ever done science, you know when you're trying to understand a behavior, you separate out, well, there's the genetic part, there's the environmental part, and then there's another part that is distinct and on its own and has its own place when you're quantifying things, and that's the interaction. And it's different. It's a whole separate unit. So the way you combine those two things together becomes a third thing unto its own. So I've seen an awful lot of genetically shy individuals who, because of early environment, went way, you know, were taken a long, long way, and vice versa. So it's not just how shy they are genetically and what their early environment is. We'll talk more about environment later. It's how those two things just happen to interweave. You know, my star, I mean, I love all my dogs, but the dog that I've just completely turned into a fool over is Luke. I mean, I'm in love with Luke. I just adore Luke. Luke is one of those dogs that you think maybe you'll never get. You know, there'll just never be another Luke. There just won't. It doesn't mean I don't love all my dogs just totally and completely. But Luke is Luke. I can't, it's just, what can I say? Luke is Luke. And he lived a hellish first year of his life. From what I understand, I have been told that his ex-owner held the electric collar down until he defecated. And he wouldn't, and she did it when he got to her feet. And she did it because he wouldn't come when he was 5 months old. This is the dog that I take everywhere, that kids, you know, take food from, that gets hugged, that goes to all my speeches and talks. So I sort of figure this is a really good set of genes. You know, this is one holy heck of a good set of genes. So it gets very complicated, but we have to understand at first how these things fit together. The last thing I want to say about shyness is that if you do breeding, or if you're working with a breeder or selecting a puppy, shyness is so important. There's a lot of shyness in border collies. There's a lot of shyness in a lot of dogs. A lot of the guard dogs have a lot of shyness in them. I think part of the reason that some of the guard dogs get in so much trouble with their teeth is because they're afraid of unfamiliar people. This is a trait many people have bred on purpose. You know, what are you going to do? Have a black lab in the junkyard? Hi, 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 hi. You know, it just sort of... I have a dear friend who's also a professional dog trainer, and I was so pleased when she told me the story of when her husband started traveling out of town, was gone constantly. She said, I got a Doberman because I was worried about living in the middle of nowhere by myself. And she said, and I got the sweetest, wussiest Doberman, and you guys, half of you know Dobermans, like wuss dogs, right? She said, I got the wussiest Doberman I could find, but she said, it broke my heart and I still feel bad about it, but I had his ears cut. And she said, I still feel bad about it. I know it was a painful thing to do. And you know what? I got a Doberman because I wanted him to look scary. You know, wouldn't have hurt anything, but I wanted him to look scary. So there are a lot of forces that are driving us actually to keep this concern about unfamiliar things. And then there are a lot of forces that are causing a lot of problems with that. Most pet people obviously do not want a shy dog. That's the last thing they want. But if it's just shy, it doesn't mean it's going to bite. There's a whole other set of characteristics that you need to combine with that to create trouble. And the next one is, I would argue, is what I call a predisposition. Oh, that has nothing to do with dogs. I'll just skip it. Can't see that one very well. Can you see this slide, you guys? I'm not pleased about the slides. Can you tell there's a puppy on top of another puppy? Can you tell in the back? Can you? Okay. Can you see better? Should I like get all upset about this? We'll talk about it at the break. Okay. Can I go upset? This is a puppy on top of another puppy in sort of a classic dominance display posture, right? So the next trait I want to talk about that I think is mediated genetically, and there is no science behind this. There's no research behind this. Here's a PhD just dying to happen, by the way. There are many of them. I'll give you at least 10 topics this weekend. Is what I call a status-seeking individual. And you will notice that I do not talk much slides out of my mouth sometimes because it's so convenient. I don't talk much about a dominant dog. That's actually a misuse of the term. I'm going to talk this afternoon about dominance and what it really is. Basically, dominance is a state. It's a condition at a particular given point of time. It's about priority access to limited resources. That's what dominance is. Dominance is you put a bone between two puppies and who gets the puppy. That's what dominance is. What did I say? You put a puppy. It's a horrific thought, isn't it? Thank you. I'm glad you know what I meant. I think, and it's just a belief, and I really want to know what you think, I think a predisposition to want to be high in status, I call them status-seeking individuals, animals who want to be high up in the hierarchy, I think that's highly heritable. And I say that not too worried that I'm just sort of making stuff up. I mean, look at different breeds. How many, those of you who do serious behavioral consultations for aggression, okay, how many times have you seen a whippet about status-related aggression? And how many times have you said, hold your hand up, oh, another submissive husky? Right? There seems to be this sort of breed predisposition, right, for having more or less individuals of that breed to be what I call status-seeking. I think it's highly heritable. And I want to be, I'm going to stop myself because there's a lot I want to say about dominance, but I'm going to save it for my dominance talk this afternoon. I think it's been oversimplified. I think it's very easy to use it in the wrong way. I think tossing the concept out is just a tragedy. So I'll talk about it a lot this afternoon, but I just want you to record it now as what I think is a partially genetically mediated trait that we need to be thinking about. Oh, I'm doing reverse. This is a puppy doing what's called passive submission. It's just a lovely little pose there. I'm going to show you a video of a lot of puppy stuff either at the end of the morning or this afternoon. We're going to talk about this passive submission posture, which is never very passive if you actually watch it. That puppy moved 27 times in 2 seconds. So one of the things about this predisposition to be a dominant individual or want to be a dominant individual, be a status-seeking individual, I think is that the age of expression can be very important. It can be very, very important in terms of prognosis and successful treatment. I was just telling somebody earlier, I had a Border Collie puppy who I bought. I brought her home at about 8 weeks, and at 12 weeks, I mean 3 months of age, she found a dead, half-composed bird, some wonderful dog treasure. You know, oh boy, it's dead, it has maggots, oh God. And she was just thrilled, and I just went to take it away from her. Just really sort of, you know, one of those, mind somewhere else, went like this, and she growled, snapped at me. I'm not used to 12-week-old Border Collie puppies that I have selected growling lunge. I was shocked. And I did correct her, and then I spent the next 3 months teaching her it's fun to give things up because you get something better. But I was pretty shocked that that happened at 12 weeks. And when I have somebody come to me and say, my puppy attacked the vet's face with an agonistic pucker, I'll talk later about the details of that, but one of those really offensive, I'm not scared, but you know, I'm going to get you, you know, hard-eyed, mouth forward, going to bite you. You ever seen a 7-week-old puppy do that? Oh, to a human? Yes. Really chills you, doesn't it? You sort of go to one eye, I don't want that dog. Too bad it's your dog, glad it's not mine. You know, and then you have a little discussion about, and what's the breeder's policy on returns? You know, I know you want a puppy, are you sure you want this puppy? You know, you have that little talk, right? I get really worried about dogs that I see express this at an early age. It's a whole other thing to see a 3 or 4-year-old poodle growl over a bone to a little kid, and that's the first time it happens, than it is to see a 7-week-old puppy do it. We'll talk some more about puppy tests. But age of onset of an individual trying to use status to control its environment is a very important predictor, I think, of potential trouble. And again, that's no data, that's just a belief. That's just based on my experience. That's black. Let's talk about a third trait. I want to talk about a trait that I call reactivity. There's a lot of literature on other species on reactivity. And basically what I mean by that is the difference between, oh, who shall we pick? Name some really mellow breed. Okay, you got a 10-year-old golden. And the football game is on, and everybody's yelling, go Raiders, go Packers. And there are 3 kids in the back, and your golden is, right? And then you've got, name a super high energy level reactive breed. Fox? Jack Russell. Funny how I heard terrier over and over. Gosh, got any around here lately? What is the terrier explosion? Amy and I have been talking about that. In the Midwest used to be like 2/3 of the dogs were lab crosses. TV, Frasier? So you got a terrier in the other room with the same stuff going on his right? And what have you got? Right? Reactive. What is the level of intensity of the stimulus to get a response? You can look at it even at a single cell level, or you can look at it at a whole animal level. But single cells work on this off-on principle. So all the neurons in your brain actually have this like digital, they're all digital. They're all off-on. And the intensity of a stimulus has to be high enough to like trip a gate to open up the chemical channel so the electricity changes, the chemistry changes, and it actually sends an electrical signal through the neuronal circuit. So there's an off-on switch, and something has to be high enough to trip it. It's really the same with an individual. And I think, and there is some research on this, I know they've been done some research on hyper-reactive pointers in the South. You might have seen some of that. It's still ongoing. But there's a tendency of individuals, I think it's very important in terms of understanding who they are and how they behave and what they did, that I think is genetically mediated, that creates animals who just sit there and pant while all hell breaks loose around them, versus the dobies. Dobies are very Shelties, you know? Shelties are somewhat reactive. Border collies are somewhat reactive. Bull mastiffs are not. And since you mentioned terriers, let's just look at an example of 2 breeds. I took this at a rest stop. I was traveling across the country. St. Bernard Terrier. St. Bernard Terrier. St. Bernard Terrier. Could this be genetic? Nah. Nah. And it makes all the sense in the world. You know what St. Bernards were bred for. It really wasn't originally for rescue. They were cart animals. Can you imagine a terrier delivering milk? Your milkshake is here. I mean, this would not work, right? This is a problem. So I would argue that reactivity is a very, very important genetically mediated trait that we should be thinking about when we're looking at individual dogs. Let me talk about a 4th trait, and that's very simply predisposition to bite. I think it's genetically mediated. I think does that mean I think it's all genetic? No. When I say genetically mediated, I just mean there's some influence of personality. I mean, really, that's what I mean. When I say genetically mediated, I mean some individuals are born with certain tendencies. Do you remember the big, you might have read about, or if you're as old as I am, you might remember some of the big behaviorist controversy. I was actually a little after Skinner, but B.F. Skinner and that big, very strict operant conditioning behaviorist controversy in which it was B.F. Skinner who said, give me any child and I can turn them into any occupation. Well, you know what? He's wrong. You couldn't turn me into an astrophysicist because I can't do three-dimensional space. Organic chemistry was like going to hell. Math, nope, I love math. I love calculus. I was like the math nerd girl in school, you know. Nobody dated me because I love math. It was so cool. I love algebra. The algebra is just like a game. I loved it. Organic chemistry was a nightmare because my brain doesn't do three-dimensional stuff. And actually, I apparently am not the only woman in the world. There are gender-related differences. Now, nobody here would agree with me. I'm sure that there are some gender-related behavioral differences in our species, but there are in, and I just have to pause. What is it about this? Guys? Where's the guys? What is it?
You wouldn't understand.
He said I wouldn't understand. But I'm a biologist, you can tell me. Oh, the mind boggles. I could go somewhere, but I won't. They're taping this. I have to be good. It's so fun when you're not on radio or TV, you know. You get to be a little, but now they're taping me, so now I have to be good. I don't understand that particular behavioral predisposition, but that's okay. You know, you don't have to understand things to love them, right? We don't always understand our dogs. We're already talking about that. So this predisposition to use your mouth to solve a conflict, I would argue, is partially genetically mediated. There's a huge environmental influence, and we're going to talk about environmental influences later, but I really sincerely want to know, do you agree with me that there are some dogs who just have a tendency to use their mouth when they're stuck, and that just comes that way? Do you agree? Wouldn't it be great to do research on that, to really, really, really get precise about understanding it? How heritable is it? You know, what is it that triggers it in some species? And it's not always bad. It's really not always bad. If you're interested in aggression, and you want to deal with aggression in dogs, I'll tell you what I learned, and I didn't do this on purpose. I wasn't smart enough to just plan it. It just happened. I have border collies that got real into sheep herding. And there are times where dogs have to use their mouths. They just have to. And you'll see Luke use his mouth this afternoon, and everybody's like, oh, or I say, it's tomorrow. And he had to use his mouth. Now, the fact that he had to use his mouth is his fault. So you can still fault him. But at that context, the situation he got into, he had to use his mouth. This dog, can you see this dog? This is Craig, Jack Knox's Craig. He's since passed away. These are sheep who've never been worked by dogs. And believe me, there is no ba ram you in sheep herding. And sheep who have not learned to be worked by a dog will run up to a dog like, oh, hi, who are you? What are you? Sniff, 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 sniff. She didn't bite, she didn't bite. And you can see young dogs go, and these dogs, I mean, look at these sheep. They're big, and sheep can hurt things. You know, it's like, oh, little sweet sheepies. Wrong. Play with sheep herding and get clipped by one of these things, or get rammed by one of them. Luke actually saved my life from one of these. So these sheep had never been worked by a dog in their life. This was a clinic. This was a clinic from hell, because young dogs were supposed to work these sheep, and they really couldn't. They ended up working ducks, literally. So they started going after him, and this poor dog had no choice but to open his mouth, and it was lovely to watch him. He went through this whole continuum of, see these? And then he actually started tooth clacking. And by the way, does anybody have a dog who does that? The best, what do you think that is?
No clue.
Not a clue. He doesn't play. Is it like a real chatter?
No,
It's just a one clack. There's a distinction between a real excited jaw chatter versus a tooth clack. And in wolf ethologists call that tooth clack it's basically a threat. It's like, hear these? You know, it's like, see this? See this? Right? So he did that. That didn't work because they didn't know dog talk. And he finally actually had to nip them on the nose, and they went, So if you want to understand about appropriate use of a bite, watch or get involved in a sport in which dogs have to use their mouths. I have learned so much about aggression from watching dogs get in situations on sheep or cattle where they had to use their mouth. Or Schutzen. Schutzen is not a sport that I know much about. I've just seen a little bit of it, but that's another situation in which dogs have to use their mouths on purpose. It teaches you a lot about why dogs are doing what they're doing, because you'll see confident dogs bite appropriately, and you'll see terrified dogs bite panicked and hysterically and inappropriately. And once you see that continuum, then you see it in a family setting. It teaches you a lot. You know, was that one hard sort of hitman bite, or was that this panicked bite? Regrettably, the panicked, fearful one is often the one that causes the most injury, very often, as you all know. So, I just want to say one word about this predisposition to bite. I think this isn't quite the same, but it correlates with what William Campbell, who I think did a lot of great work, calls active defense reflex versus passive defense reflex. I find that a very useful way of sorting the world out. I mean, all of these things are just categories we make up because that's how our brains work, but I find it very convenient. Active defense reflex dogs who are in conflict if trapped strike out. They go forward, they use their mouths to bite. Passive defense reflex dogs who reflexively, without making a real decision, withdraw and go away. Right? And there's an interesting contradiction in what we want. Because what is the pet dog? Everybody's pet dog is a passive defense reflex dog. What is, and look at all the dogs that are becoming pets. Heelers, Aussies, Border Collies, Shepherds, Rotties, Dobermans. I'll show you some passive defense reflex dogs on sheep, and they look really pathetic. Hi, Bob, am you? It's not working. Doesn't work. Okay, there are lots of other breed predispositions, and I'm just not going to talk about them, except to just briefly bring up how many, many genetically mediated qualities there are that inform us about who a dog is and why they do what they do. And a lot of them I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about them because they're the obvious ones. Yeah, huskies run. You know, bloodhounds are sort of the nose with paws. That's what I call beagles, is the nose with paws. You know, and you always want to be thinking about what actually drives a dog to do what it does, especially when you're thinking about conditioning and reinforcement. What does this dog want? You know, a Border Collie wants to be like a team and to do it right. That's what right? Border Collies are like, is it right? So you do something twice, and they do it right the first time, and you're doomed. Because you ask them again, they go, well, that wasn't right then. Was it like this way? Well, maybe so they start doing these little riffs, right? And you can't use repetition with them. You destroy everything. They're like, well, then maybe it's here. It's over here. You say sit. It's like, I could sit like this. I could sit on one paw. And they're like wrecks about it. You know? Whereas a bloodhound is like, sit. But then I couldn't smell. This is the dog I see in my office mostly. And I don't mean a German Shepherd. And by the way, somebody complained to me once because I showed this slide and they said, it's not fair to trash German Shepherds. So if you have a slide that shows all these things that's of a Cocker Spaniel, who's a dog I'm far more afraid of, please bring it to me. I just happen to have this slide. I didn't take this picture. Yeah, it's better over here. This is the dog I see in my office. This is the dog who is shy, status-seeking, reactive, and predisposed to use their mouth, right? That's the dog. Pardon? High suspicion level, I like that. Although, you know, I love that you brought that up. I'm not going to talk too much about it now, but maybe later we can get into it, because I see there appear to be differences in kinds of fear, and I see dogs who are clearly just fearful in a pure, simple sense. Oh, I'm scared. Oh, please go away, please, please, right? And then I see dogs who don't occur like that to me. And it's somewhat breed related in that there seems to be a predisposition, and the breed that comes to mind right off the bat is Aussies, which is, who are you? You're not supposed to sit there. You're supposed to sit over there. Why are you sitting there? Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? And I love that you brought that up, because there seems to be this suspiciousness that some dogs have. And I'm not sure it's the same as fear. I treat it similarly. I'm just this is a new context to me. I just developed this over the last couple of months because I've seen so many Aussies like that lately.
I think it has a shyness factor in it. I think it has a very heavy genetic shyness factor in it, and I think that you use the word suspicion in certain breeds.
Interesting. So I don't know if what she said was that she thinks there's a very strong genetically mediated factor to it, which is very related to shyness, which I would agree with. In terms of a big category, you know, if you're looking at a big umbrella category, it's definitely shy. But perhaps there's some very small subcategories within that, and that there's a difference between perhaps a kind of, oh, I'm so afraid I'm going to get hurt, versus, what are you doing? You know, why are you doing that? I don't know. And your point is a really good one, that perhaps in some breeds we call it suspicion. In another breed, we just call it fear. You know, maybe it's a bias that we have that's not biologically relevant. But I think that's a great point. Let me make a couple of points right before the break about genetic factors. And then we'll pick up after the break with in utero and early development factors that influence behavior. One is, it's really important to be clear the impact of genetics on a particular behavioral trait. It is not a blueprint set in stone. Every behavioral trait, well, behavioral traits either have a continuum or they're off on, right? They're either digital, you know, either blue eyes or brown eyes, or you herd sheep. No, that's not good. That's a continuum. I can't think of a digital off-on behavioral trait. There are probably a million of them. It'll come to me later on the weekend. Oh, that's an interesting one, a tendency to submissively urinate. I think I would put that more on a, well, now that's a great, actually, I love that you brought that up, because really you can think of it, there's a continuum of submission, right? But you know what's really good about what you said is within that continuum, there's also this discontinuous off-on, you know. You get to some point in that continuum and you do or you don't. You know, and that's a wonderful, I love that you said that, because that's a wonderful way of saying how integrated all this stuff is. A lot of it's a continuum. Let's just take the shy-bold continuum, the submissive-dominant continuum that you brought up. If this is the continuum of all possible behavior and all possible dogs, this is the shyest any dog has ever been. This is the boldest, God save us, that any dog has ever been. What genetics does is it sets a window somewhere that you can move a dog within. You can make them a little more this way by the environment. You can make them a little bit this way. There's no way to know where those ends are until you do it. And that's the downside of doing behavioral counseling, is people come in and very understandably, right, they say, is this dog going to bite my kid again? And you say, I don't know. I can't guarantee anything. What I can tell you is that there's a good chance, say it's a case where you'd say this, there's a good chance we can substantially improve the behavior of your dog. But I can't tell you what that looks like. You know, can we get him here? Can we get him here? I don't know. You know, how do you know if you start working out how buff you're going to get? You don't know. Although your trainer probably has a better idea than you do, your trainer. Do you guys have trainers? We don't have, well, there are people in the Midwest who have trainers, right? Not many of us have personal trainers in the Midwest. It just sounds so cool. But an expert in some field, it might be better than you at guessing what that boundary is, right? But keep in mind that genetics set boundaries, and you can move an animal by changing its environment, which we'll talk a lot later on the weekend about. And try and find eventually where those boundaries are. The other point I want to make about genetics before the break is that you can't fix everything. You just can't. Those boundaries, once you find them, are there. And for some reasons I don't understand, I think it's very human, and I put myself in the same category, human, it's me. We all have probably a genetically mediated predisposition to be more accepting of physical boundaries on our dogs than we do with behavioral ones. How many of you who've had a dog who melts in obedience competition and hates it, but you want to do it, and it's your dog, and you love your dog, and you want this to be the dog, and you keep working at it, and you keep working at it. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because think how much we learned from that. I worked a dog in sheep herding who you're just going to die laughing at for 2 years. Because I loved her, and she was Pt1, and I wanted to work her in sheep, and she had some really good qualities. The fact that she was terrified of the sheep, I thought maybe I could just fix. Because I'm a dog trainer, you know? And I could just fix that. Well, you know what? Pt1 is a wonderful, wonderful dog. And she doesn't really work sheep very much anymore. And it seems very hard for us to accept that. And I'm not quite sure why. But you might want to think about it sometime later when you're working with somebody or your own dog and you've been like spending 5 years to get this dog to do agility. And he's like, I hate jumping. I hate jumping. Oh, we do it with our kids. Oh, don't we? And you know who else we do it to? Our spouses. Right? Would we ever do that? Like, you're supposed to be, like my perfect fantasy. I went to this great weekend seminar about men, actually. It was called Celebrating Men and Satisfying Women. It was a great thing. If you ever have a chance to go, it's a great thing. And basically, it started out by saying, let's list what we want men to be. And so there's this long, and let's list what men are. You know, so in an hour, it was getting pretty rasty. You know, well, they're noisy, they're, and what do you want them to be? And basically she said, okay, look at that list. Doesn't that describe the perfect woman? It's like, and we all want, yeah. And she said, so are you all like that? Are you that perfect? And we all went, no. She said, do you really want to be married to a woman? And we all went, well, naturally, this is a pretty hetero crowd. No, we really like guys. It was really good. It's like, you know, I really like guys. You know, they get to be guys. So since we're not doing genetic shaping on either guys or girls, we just have to accept who they are, but we don't have to accept that in terms of breeding our dogs. And I want us to end this segment by thinking about what are we breeding, either inadvertently, advertently? Is there, do we do things advertently? We do them inadvertently. What are we breeding? And think about what animals get ribbons for. And I really, it's my big soapbox. I'm really into this. Where are the ribbons for not biting? You know, where is the test? You know what my first breeding criteria is? You put a real bone. I don't mean a rawhide. I don't mean a nylabone. I mean you take a real bone with meat on it, a raw, real bone, and you put it down in front of a dog. And if you can't let that happen and have somebody else's one-year-old child and their parents are lawyers, take that bone away from your dog, then what are you doing breeding that dog? That is my #1 breeding criteria. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, you guys, but before you go, we have to make an agreement here. You know that sort of endless break problem? We're going to make a decision. You guys can choose. Do you get one wish? Okay, speaking of neutering or not, let's talk about in utero development, which doesn't occur without, never mind. I'm going to get in trouble if I don't stop here. I want to talk about another factor, or another suite of factors that influences behavior, and that's early development, or in utero development. I think I need to turn on the slide projector, probably. Turn on the light. I'm not going to talk too long about this because we don't know too much about this. I just want to pique your fancy and your curiosity and inspire somebody else to do yet another PhD on stuff that's just dying to happen. I don't have a picture of an in utero puppy. I don't quite know how to pull that off, and why I didn't take a picture of Lassie when she was big with puppy, I don't know, but I didn't. This is Lassie, and you probably can't tell amorphously down there. It's not because of the light, it's just a bad slide. And there's a puppy nursing on her. So we're going to talk later about early development neonatally, But what about development inside the uterus? Did you guys see the Newsweek last week about in utero influences on human physiology and health? It's really stunning stuff. Like if your mother is starving for the first 3 months of pregnancy, you're probably going to be overweight because your body is set differently. You know, people who have a lot of trouble with weight know perfectly well this is not just about eating, and this is not just about being disciplined and self-control. People who've been fighting weight all their life have been going like, hello, listen to me, there's something different here. Well, we also know there's some very strong in utero influences in canid behavior. We've just barely scratched the surface. Let me just tell you about two things that we do know about. One is in relation to stress. There is research on primates, not on dogs, but on on several other mammalian species, that's almost scary. It shows that relatively moderate stress at the right time, occurring during the right time of gestation, to the mother can have a profound influence on the behavior of an adult primate, even as far as out as age 2. I think that's where the research stopped. They looked at them at age 1 and age 2, and they found that there was one study that Dr. Susan Clark did, San Diego Zoo. They moved some species of, it was probably rhesus, but it might not have been. It might have been some other similar related species, maybe a bonnet macaque. It was one of the macaques. And they moved some pregnant macaques at exactly the same state of pregnancy into an unfamiliar cage, put them in an unfamiliar room, but they habituated them to that room. After they were used to being in that room for I don't know how many times they went, there was a loud noise that was loud and aversive but not painful, that occurred randomly over a period of maybe only 3 or 4 times over a period of about 20 minutes. Obviously, the control group was put into this cage, went into this room, and didn't hear the noise. They found very significant behavioral differences between the young of those two groups of monkeys. And I want to see a lot more on that. One of the things you learn in science is to never make too much of one study. Susan Clark's a wonderful researcher. I know her. I respect her work. She's very rigorous. She's very, very good. But it's so the differences were so profound. The ones who had been exposed to this, the maternal stress, did not cope with stress as well. Basically, when you put them in a new environment, they didn't cope well with it. Not as well as the others. That's very simplistic. And they showed major physiological changes too. I find it a little nerve-wracking that such a mild change is, you walk around and you see a pregnant woman now, and it's like, everybody be nice. So you guys can use this, by the way. If you ever get pregnant, research, you're stressing me. Research shows. I don't know how much to make of this, but I find it very interesting. We do know, the basic point here, the basic take-home message is that we know that the occurrence of physiological stress on the mother has an effect on the physiology and behavior of the adult young that were raised during that gestational period. Now, there's a good side to this, too. You may have heard of the research, this was actually done on humans, in which women were asked to lie down once a day to a particular musical piece. It was a piece of classical music. I don't remember the work. I heard it. I actually heard it recorded from a microphone inside the uterus of a pregnant woman, so they could figure out what the baby was actually hearing. And it was a riot. It was like Beethoven's Fifth underwater. You know? I mean, you could really hear it. You could find the tune. You could follow the tune. It was really cool. It sounded a little watery, but you could still follow. You could track the harmony and the tune. It was great. And what they did is they just asked women to lie down and take a nap or to rest while this music was playing. And what they found is that after the babies were born, if you played this music, the babies went to sleep. Don't you wish you'd not had your kids, right? Now, is it going to be magic? Is it going to work like that no matter? No, in your dreams. Is it going to work on puppies? No, because they can't hear till they're 2 weeks old, right? But it's a wonderful reminder of how much that happens to the mother is actually happening to the young. And that's another very, very important factor to think about when you're talking about genetics. we're just starting to get how hard it actually is to separate out genetics with in utero experience. And it turns out there's way more effective in utero experience than we thought there was. So not a lot of information there, but I hope your ears are pricked now. Let's talk about, well actually let me talk about one more effect of a particular placement in utero, not an event that happens to your mother, but actually where a puppy is or where a mammal of a multiple, of a litter species actually occurs within the utero. You know how most multiple birth mammals, they actually have a bicorned uterus? They have two. Oh God. they have two. You know, it's like a Y. And so one puppy comes from one side and one puppy comes from the other like that. Well, when you have these two long, relatively thin uteruses, what you get is you get puppies stacked on top of each other. And that's what you get with rats and mice and anything that has litters. So you get puppy, 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 puppy. And then, of course, these two horns are relatively close together. So you get puppy, puppy, you know, puppy, 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 puppy. So some puppies are in a different situation than others in that some puppies can be surrounded by individuals of the other sex, and some puppies can be surrounded by individuals of the same sex. And it turns out that androgen, which is a precursor to testosterone, which is what creates the secondary sex characteristics, you know, there's a Y, there's either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. If there's a Y, what the Y actually does is partway through development says, start producing androgen. And the production of androgen is what creates what are called secondary sex characteristics, right? Secondary sex characteristics are mediated in a very simplistic term by this production of this hormone that it turns out can move through the placental wall. It doesn't necessarily stay right in that uterine packet. So if you have, and this is the research that was very rigorous and done not on dogs, as far as I know, I'll talk a minute about a possibility that's very exciting, but on rats and mice, it's very, very, very rigorous, clear evidence that if you get a female who's surrounded by males, what you get is a female who acts differently than other females. What you get is a female who's been androgenized. And what I mean by androgenized is that I'll tell you the mice and rats first and then make some comparisons with dogs. Androgenized mice and rats, they're females, right? Because a male androgenized rat is like a normal rat, right? Female androgenized rat, first of all, is anatomically somewhat different. Her genitals are somewhat different, but not a lot. They're somewhat different, but behaviorally, she acts more like a male. And besides reproductively wanting to mount more rather than get into a receptive posture like female rats do, they're more aggressive. And they're more aggressive particularly to other females. There is very good reason to believe that that's also true in dogs. Now, one of your colleagues suggested that she saw some research that came out of Cambridge in England that suggested that same work has been replicated on canids. She's going to see if she can find it for me. Has anybody seen it or heard of it? Do you know the actual research? John talked about it? Yeah. Anybody who can actually find the real data, that would be great. I'd love to see the data because there's actually a researcher here, one of the people who was one of the first discoverers of this phenomena in rodents, is very interested in doing some work on dogs. So this is a possible explanation for those females who lift their legs, for one thing. I mean, haven't you looked at the female and going, I wonder why she lifts her leg, right? I wonder why she's so rude, you know? This is Bess. Bess has since passed away. Bess was one of my border collies. She was very submissive to people, very dominant to other dogs. I wouldn't call her androgenized to the extreme in that she never got in a fight in her life. But there's a possibility that there are some female dogs out there who, simply because of their position in the utero and because of a flooding of androgen, are different with other females than they would be normally. And by the way, I want to be very clear about testosterone and androgen, even though most of the people in here are female. If you have a belief that testosterone is what causes aggression, give it up. You know, like I just saw a letter to the editor in our local newspaper that said, this is just another example of how testosterone should be a regulated, controlled substance, and if women ruled the world, there'd be no fighting and no aggression. In your dreams, bitches. Not a chance. And if you study the basics of animal behavior, or look at the research on dog-dog aggression, you know, what did Cornell come up with? What are the most injurious fights? Who are they between? Two females, same household. Right? We all know that. God forbid the client comes to you and says, I have two female, I don't know, you know, terriers who are both intact and are breeding bitches. And gosh, they fight right before they go into estrus. Yeah? No? Yeah? No? Yeah, they do. But these androgenized females are hyper-aggressive. And somewhat scarily, there is research that I have also not seen the data on, but have read summaries and abstracts of, again from England, who is way ahead of us, by the way. We are little Neanderthals when it comes to behavior. But this particular research suggested that androgenized females are actually less aggressive if they're allowed to go through 2 heat cycles. Because something about the production of estrogen and progesterone balances them out. Now, how are you going to know? You don't. You don't. And I also want to caution you, because this is such a great story. Isn't it satisfying? Such a great story. And it's so cool. It's just really, I just love it. It's just fun. But you know, I was talking to a breeder who had a 7 male, 1 female litter. Nah, nothing. Doesn't lift her legs, never aggressive. Genitalia is not any different. So it's not, you know, don't think it's something, I don't want to oversimplify this. It's just something to pay attention to that's interesting. Okay, let's talk about neonatal experiences and early development, meaning outside of the womb. Now, this is a really nice, clean kennel. These are actually the kennels for the puppies I use for my PhD research, which are on sound and how animals respond to different kinds of sounds. And I was really committed to raising healthy puppies. And I also had to follow a lot of regulations from animal care, right? So it was critical that I had a really clean environment. I think many of us are very important about cleanliness, as well we should be, right? But I want to argue to you that this environment is actually impoverished in one sense compared to this environment, in which these animals are full of internal parasites, they're starving, but they're in an enriched environment. So I went to incredible lengths to try and enrich the environment of these puppies. They went home at 5 months. That's really late, right? So I had lots of volunteers who came and played with the puppies. We actually took them out on puppy field trips to change their environment, because I knew I wouldn't be doing research on normal animals. And by the way, I do want you to know that most medical research on physiology, we've talked about how combined physiology and behavior are just a little bit, most medical research on physiology, immune response, and health is done on insane animals who do not even come close to representing the normal population. It's on immune-compromised animals who are under continual stress. And I don't say that to knock medical progress, because I am the recipient of it all the time. And it's just, you need to know that. It's just the truth. It's just what it is. So I went to incredible lengths to have normal animals, 1, ethically, because there was no question. Of course I would have to do that. And 2, scientifically, I felt it was really important to do that also. So I want to talk for a minute about the importance of environmental enrichment. You may or may not know, I mean, you all know that this is important, but you might find it helpful to have even more fuel when you're talking to somebody else, perhaps a breeder who brings up puppies in a kennel until they're 8 to 9 months old, until she can evaluate them, right? We all know those. We all see those puppies way too much, right? And often, you know, often they're very reputable breeders. This really drives me crazy. it's extremely useful to have the science behind what all your observations are. And one of the most useful scientific facts that I know that helps make arguments about environmental enrichment and its importance is the research that has been done on many, many species of animals. Thank God not dogs, but it clearly relates, which is about how an enriched environment changes the anatomy and the structure of an animal's brain. It literally changes the permanent structure of an animal's brain. And I'll just briefly simplify it, not because you couldn't get all the details, it would just take too long. Every mammal is born with more neurons than they use. And all these, so all these little neurons like this. So here's a little nerve cell in your brain, and here's a little nerve cell in your brain. And they're not connected. What happens before and after birth, for quite a long period of time, is based on the environment, based on what happens to that individual, these neurons start connecting. The ones that don't get connected actually die out. The more enriched and varied an environment is, the more neurons connect. The more neurons that are connected, the more an animal can deal with stress and change. And it's just that simple, and it's absolutely robust. It's really good science. It's just, they've just beaten this, it's done this over and over in species after species. And that means, particularly during those early weeks, from 0 to 12 to 15 weeks, and I really think, boy, I just think that adolescent period is so important too. I really think we should be, we can talk about socializing. People use that term very bigly, very, very broadly. Bigly, very bigly. I think we need to be enriching the environment of our dogs until they're about a year old. But the early weeks have the most profound effect on this dendritic branching, it's called. So have you seen Battaglia's suggestion? Have you seen Dr. Carmen Battaglia's suggestion? Be nice. Punish you. He actually has a procedure he goes through with puppies from 3 to 16 weeks in which he tickles, just for a few seconds. He stresses that he feels it actually can cause harm if you do it for too long. For a few seconds to each puppy, once a day, 3 to 16 days, you tickle the pads between their toes. You hold them so their head is straight up and their back legs are straight, so they're sort of vertical. Then you turn them over so their head is straight down, just for a few seconds, literally. What else? Do you pinch their little paws? Paws on a wet towel. Paws on a cold, wet towel. You do each exercise 1 time a day for 3 to 5 seconds only. He claims, and I'd love to see his data. Has anybody seen Battaglia? Battaglia. Pretty close, right? He spoke at APDT last year, the year before, so you could actually buy one of his videos from Creative Video, because he spoke at APDT either last year or the year before that. It's very interesting. I would love to see the data. I'm a scientist, I want to see the data, but I find it fascinating. I think it's a really interesting inquiry for us to get into. And I've done it with a couple of my litters, but obviously that's not research. Yeah, well, they seem good. Yeah, well, what does that mean? I don't know. I didn't compare anything. Tell us.
Marion Diamond has been studying, she basically looked originally at geriatric rats and provided an enriched environment, and she basically found the same thing that you just said, and I was wondering if you're familiar with that, and if you could extrapolate that to dogs. She certainly has.
That's wonderful. I am not specifically familiar with her work, and I love that you brought it up. She mentioned the work of Dr. Marion Diamond. Is she a neurologist? Neuroanatomy. Okay. Sounds like fascinating research. I've seen the sort of the general abstract of basically work that she did with geriatric rats in which she found the same thing. If you enrich their environment, you actually get structural changes, certainly concomitant behavioral changes. She's making analogies to humans. I think about that a lot when you think about people in rest homes. Think about in sterile environments in which absolutely nothing is happening. I mean, there's just no question that this is not a good environment for a human. That's a great point to make. Marion Diamond, she said her work is. Okay, let me talk.
Before you go on,
yes.
Say what the purpose of Battaglia is.
Oh, thank you. She asked me a very good question. What was the purpose of Battaglia's manipulations. The purpose is to decrease distress response. The purpose is to create stable puppies who react stably to change. You know, keep in mind that stress is not a bad thing inherently. I mean, biologically, stress is change from homeostasis, just change from the normal state. I mean, you know, inside here there's this incredibly complicated chemistry experiment, right? And it actually has very, very, very small boundaries. I mean, the temperature gets too high, the whole thing crashes. The temperature gets too low, it crashes. Blood pressure has to be just right. It's a pretty tricky experiment. One of the things that mediates all that is an animal's response to change. That's what stress is. Stress is just change, where the body changes from its normal state. And one of the things you look at in terms of overall health is how fast an animal can rebound from a challenge to homeostasis. And that's one of the, actually, if a dog gets stressed a lot by change, that's often a dog who can't tolerate a big change without whole physiology overreacting, and then isn't capable of rebounding from it relatively early on. There's a hand up, yeah.
So was that statement saying that it's easier, you have a better effect if it's done at an earlier age than if you have an adult?
He claims that his question was, so Battaglia is then saying that it has a different effect at 3 to 16 days than. No, his question is a very good one. Would it take longer with an older dog but still have the same effect? And what Battaglia argues is that 3 to 16 days actually has a profound effect on a particular stage of development, which is a window which is closed. If you do it later, he says, it's sort of like socialization. It doesn't have the same effect. Love to see the data. I'm gonna pass on, and I hate to, but there's just so much for us to do. Let me talk about single pup litters. Because I'm very interested in them, and I want to tell you how I got interested in litters that just had one puppy. As somebody who people bring serious behavioral problems to, I started having the feeling, and I want to stress that it's just a feeling. I have no way of really knowing if this appearance of an overrepresentation of problem dogs who were just the litter. No, this is George, he's the litter. I started getting the feeling that I saw more of those dogs in my office who seemed to have no frustration tolerance. And by the way, I should really add that trait to genetically mediated traits. John Fisher talked a lot about a lot of aggression being based on animals who just had no ability to tolerate frustration. That was such a helpful mindset to me. I'm so grateful to him. I just found that so helpful. I think a lot of dogs suffer from frustration intolerance. They get frustrated, they just lose it. You know, they just lose it. And I would see these puppies and these older dogs, mostly these older dogs, who would go into rages. They couldn't get what they wanted and they'd lose it. They'd go into a rage where they were literally out of control. And I think it's really important to distinguish that when we say a dog is out of control, they're out of their own control. It's not just that you can't control them, it's that they can't control themselves. You know, we all seen dogs. Now, there's some dogs who really aren't. You know, the owner is just, oh, I just can't do anything. And you go, hello. And they go, oh, did you want something? Now, that is a dog who's out of the owner's control, but not your control and not their control. But you know the dogs I mean. They're really hysterical. That's what hysteria is, out of cognitive control. They also seem very touch intolerant. So you pick them up and they growl or they snap. And it really seemed like I was seeing a lot of dogs who fit this category. And I started thinking a lot about, you know, maybe this says having one puppy is a big problem. Maybe this is a bad thing. And I felt that so strongly that when Pip, one of my Border Collie females, had one puppy, I was a wreck. I mean, I kept waiting. You know, come on, please. And I finally found myself walking around at 5:30 in the morning, which was obviously going to be the only puppy of the whole litter. I was a wreck. Because I was so concerned, I seriously considered euthanizing it. That is how bad the dogs I saw. That is how bad I was thinking that this was.